Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, today we are going to talk about bells. Now, you may not realize, but there's a lot of significance behind bells. They're actually a simple musical instrument, but there's a lot more that we can learn about bells that you probably didn't realize. So, buckle up and here we go. Let's roll that episode now. All right. Well, hey, today I wanted to talk about bells. Bells, 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 bells. Hell's bells, right? There's lots of different references to bells, especially around the holidays. And so I just wanted to do an episode about bells, and we're going to kind of go all over the place like we do in a lot of these solo episodes. But you can see that the title is Sleigh Bells Ring. Are you listening? Right. So I think the song Winter Wonderland, right, that comes around this time of year, kind of goes like this, right? Sleigh bells ring. Are you listening? In the lane, snow is glistening. A beautiful sight. We're happy tonight. Walking in a winter wonderland. Something like that, right? So, the real question for today's episode is, are you listening? Right? Because there's bells, there's other things going on around us all the time, and you can choose whether you're going to hear them or not. And we're going to get into more of that because, like I said, especially around the holiday time, there's a lot of references to bells that I wanted to talk about today. Now, before we get started with today's episode, I wanted to give you a couple of updates too, and talk to you a little bit about the podcast and kind of where we're going, and some ways that you can interact more with me and be able to get more out of your listening pleasure, if you will. Okay. Now, whether you realize it or not, there is a lot of censorship that goes on in the world today. There's a lot of things that you're being told that are not true, because there are certain beings in this world that want to keep you in fear and anxiety. They want to keep you asleep. And so as a result of that, when people try to talk about things to help people wake up, often those people are censored. And so again, I know in a free society, you would think that does not happen, but I am here to tell you that it does happen. I know several people who have been blocked. Their accounts on social media have been canceled. There's a term in the entertainment industry about being canceled, right? If you say something that people don't like, you can literally kind of be canceled. Your shows and everything else are wiped clean, and it's as if you didn't exist. And that happens in social media as well. Now, I'm one of those kind of people that I want to share with you. I want to tell you, I want you to help wake up, okay? But because of that censorship that's out there, I have to be a little careful about some of the things that I say publicly on social media. So if you want to get the real nitty gritty, here's a couple of things that you can do. One is listen to the podcast. Now, you're already listening to this one right now, and there's a lot of information in the podcast. Again, some of it is a little bit hidden, and I'm going to talk to you about that and how I do that and why I do that here in just a minute. But make sure that you're listening to the podcast, because on the podcast, I am more free to say what I think than I can do on, social media like LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, right? Because those are platforms that are owned by other people, and my content just happens to live there. But on my website, and for the most part, the podcast could get canceled. YouTube could take down the videos, but I can always share them other places. And for example, on the website, my website, jasonmefford.com, I own that, right? Nobody can cancel me on my own website. I can say all the crazy stuff that I want to say over there, okay? Now, again, just to kind of let you in on a little bit of the secret, right? Because you're listening, and obviously you appreciate what I'm saying because you're here listening, again. But let me talk a little bit about coding and why sometimes it seems like Jason is a little bit crazy because I'm talking about certain things and I'm doing it in such a way that you can connect the dots yourself. Okay. Because honestly, if I came out and said some of the stuff that's going on in my mind, some of the things that are going on in the world, one, you would think I'm batshit crazy. Okay. Which, not that I care about that, but the problem is if people just think I'm batshit crazy, then they're not going to listen to anything. Right. So I'm going to give you little breadcrumbs of stuff. And those people that are listening, right? Because again, as we talked about, today's episode is about, are you listening? Those people who are listening will be able to connect the dots and will kind of understand what I'm talking about. And so you've heard me maybe make some reference to things like this before. When I was talking about ice cream, well, I'm talking about ice cream, but I'm not talking about ice cream. Okay. Today, we're going to be talking about bells. And I'm talking about bells, but I'm not talking about bells. There is a deeper meaning behind what we're going to be talking about today. Okay. So, one reason, just so you don't think I'm batshit crazy and you just shut me off and don't even listen. Second reason is if you're not ready to hear it, you shouldn't hear it. Okay. Now, I have the privilege of working with a great teacher, Don Javier, and when I talk with him, I'm able to actually record a lot of our conversations. Now, I go back and I listen to those recordings over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? It's not because I'm stupid, but it's because the words that are used, the things that are said, each time I listen to it, sometimes I kind of hear the same things, but I always get something new out of it. And so, again, a lot of the content that I'm providing is the same way. You might not hear things the first time you listen to it. You listen to it a second, third, fourth, fifth time. Each time you listen, you will get something new out of it. And so it's the same thing, just like you might have listened to a song for 20 years, right? And I've shared things like this before where I've listened to a particular song maybe for 20 or 30 years, but when I heard it that week, I got something different out of it. And so it's the same way, with music, with the things that are here as well. Okay. And so just wanted to kind of give you a little heads up on that. So one thing you can do is make sure subscribe to the podcast, listen to it each week because I'm going to be dropping certain bombs in there that if you're listening, you're going to get. Now, the other thing too is, again, because I can't share some of these things on social media, another way for you to be able to get it straight from the horse's mouth is to sign up for my newsletter. And again, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to sell you a bunch of shit, but again, an email, nobody can control what I say in an email. Okay. And so I'm able to share some things more directly with you from that platform as well. So you can see down below in all the show notes, at least for the last mini episodes, there's a link where you can go. So if you want to, just pause the podcast right now, go down into the show notes, sign up for the newsletter. Okay, that's another thing that you can do. Now, another thing that I've started to do, we just started this last week, is, hey, if you love the podcast and you'd like to support us, now there's an option to support. Okay. Some podcasts, they actually charge you to listen to them. I don't want to do that, right? I want this information to be shared as freely and as openly as possible. But honestly, folks, it cost me a lot of money and time to create these. So what I've done is turned on an option for you to be able to support the podcast. So again, if you're listening, if you appreciate listening each week, hey, throw me a few bones back, right? There's an option, again, in the show notes down below. You can pause the video. You can go out to that link and support the podcast. So again, I'm not asking you to do it, but if it comes from your heart and you're like, you know what, I like listening to this, I'd like to help support and continue so that the podcast can continue going forward. You can click on that link and donate $5 or $10 a month, whatever's in your heart, to be able to just help provide support to cover some of the expenses. I mean, because again, this is a labor of love. I'm not doing this to make money, but every little bit helps because I've got payroll, to pay. I've got a team to pay, and so if that is in your heart, that again is in the show notes down below, so you can actually support the podcast, and so to help us reach more and more people. Okay, so that's enough of the administrative stuff, I think, to begin with. So let's jump in and start talking about bells. Okay. Now, I just got this new screen, for Christmas. So I've got like this huge screen in the background. I've got my laptop in front of me, and I'm middle-aged now, so I've got to go back and forth between glasses, no glasses. I've got like the dual contacts going on, but I can see some stuff, I can't see some stuff, so I might be putting my glasses on and taking them off again as well, just so I can see what's going on. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Winter Wonderland, about sleigh bells ring, right? Are you listening? Well, there's some other Christmas carols that have bells in them as well. And one that's not a Christmas carol, but because I love AC/DC, is Hell's Bells, right? That's a great song. I love that song. Anyway, but there's Winter Wonderland talks about sleigh bells. There's a song, Silver Bells, Silver Bells, it's Christmas time in the city. Ring-a-ling, hear them ding. Soon it will be Christmas Day. Right? So lots of different songs. Many of us actually put bells up on our Christmas tree. In fact, I've got one bell that I took off of my Christmas tree. It doesn't ring as good as some of the other ones, but there's a story behind this bell that I'm going to talk about here in just a minute too. So there's lots of different bells that are out there. Now, again, I love movies as well. It's a Wonderful Life is one of the movies that I usually listen to at this time of year. It's kind of got a Christmas theme to it. And if you'll remember in It's a Wonderful Life, I think Zuzu, the youngest daughter, the one that got sick, and he put her, petals from her rose in his pocket, Zuzu's petals, said, right at the end, that every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings, right? Daddy, teacher said every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. And so she was taught to, still believe in the magic, and when a bell rang, to realize that, hey, an angel is getting its wings. And in fact, there's a point in there where I think Clarence is talking. They're in the bar trying to get a drink, and the guy's making fun of him because, look, I'm giving an angel its wings, because as he's opening and closing the cash register. But there's more to that again than what you might think that we're going to talk about. So you see again that there's references to bells in It's a Wonderful Life. Now, this bell that I took off my tree, right, is when my mother was still alive. I was already an adult, I think, when this came out. Maybe I was still at home. I can't remember exactly when the book, The Polar Express, came out. Okay, and so again, that's another Christmas one where again this train shows up that's headed to the North Pole, and this little boy hops on the Polar Express, and he asks Santa for one of the bells from the reindeer sleigh, the whatever you call them, the whatever they call it, right? So Santa gave him a bell, and he could hear the bell because he believed in Santa, right? And as the story goes along, he said, that when he got back home after seeing Santa and being on the Polar Express, his sister could hear the bell. But there came a time when she no longer could hear the bell. And there were certain people like his parents, that's like, look, I got this bell, and he'd ring it, but his parents couldn't hear the bell. But he could still hear the bell because he still believed in Santa. He believed in the magic of Santa Claus. Okay. Now, as I said, my mother, when she was still alive, when that book came out, that started to become a tradition. She would sit down and read it to the grandkids. She gave all of us bells, actually, that we would, so when I was, like I said, I think I was already an adult at that point, but she gave us all bells that we could wear at Christmas time. And so we would all wear our bells as she was reading the Polar Express, to my kids and the other grandkids that were there. And then we would all ring the bell because, again, what she was trying to get us to do is, remember the magic, still believe in Santa, right? And all of the wonder and the awe that can go along with the Christmas time. And because what you notice is, as we get older, Christmas itself kind of wanes, right? There's all this magic when you're a little kid. You're so excited for Santa Claus to come and to open the presents, and there's all this wonder and joy around the holiday time. And what ends up happening is after a while, we all kind of quit believing, okay, for lack of a better word. And sometimes that ends up happening because you go to school, and some of the kids on the playground are like, Santa Claus doesn't exist, right? And so then you feel stupid, like, well, everybody else is saying Santa doesn't exist, but I still do, right? And again, I don't know if you were that way when you were a kid. I was, right? And in fact, I still kind of tried to believe that Santa was real, that he really came down the chimney and all that kind of stuff. Until one year when I was going through you know, I don't know if you did this too, but we'd kind of like snoop and try to find our presents, and ended up finding presents that weren't wrapped because Santa never brought wrapped presents in our house. And I ended up finding some presents that ended up coming from Santa, right? So at that point, I knew, there wasn't a fat little man with a beard that was bringing him to me, but that Santa Claus was my parents, right? Now, just because Santa Claus is actually my parents doesn't take away the magic of Santa, okay? So think on that one for a minute, right? You can still believe in Santa and the magic that goes along with it, even if you are Santa. Okay. Now, I wanted to tie this into something else that we end up seeing a lot of too, right? Is are you listening? So the analogy here, and this is typically what happens that you will see with little kids. If you have little kids, if you have grandkids or nieces or nephews or other people like that, this is kind of what happens in human development. So babies are born, they come out, they are so sweet and beautiful, but they can't talk, right? But you can look at them, and man, there's like this love that comes from little babies, right? And then, kids start to talk, and sometime between about the age of 1 to 4, they start talking, and you notice that the magic starts to fade from the kids. Okay, and what does that look like? Well, if you know little kids, a lot of times they will talk to imaginary friends, right? Or they will say certain things like, hey, I was just talking with grandma, and you're like, what do you mean grandma's dead, right? I mean, again, if you haven't had this experience, I'm sure that someone that has had this experience where a little child, and again, they're usually, 3, 4, 5 years old, is talking with other beings who are no longer incarnated on this planet, right? And a lot of times we're like, oh, that's so sweet, but is it just, their imagination? Are these just imaginary friends? And what if they are not imaginary friends, right? Again, if you've had some of these experiences, sometimes the little kids will say things that there's absolutely no way that they can know, right? Because some of these people passed away before they were ever even born. But they're saying things or they're doing things that let you know that it's more than just an imaginary friend, right? But, again, we can't hear usually as adults where little kids can. And the reason for that, again, is the door kind of closes, right? As we are born, the door kind of closes to some of those gifts. Now, again, some of us later in life gain those gifts back. But what typically happens is a lot of the kids, from the time they're born up until 4 or 5, can be very gifted spiritually, if you will, right? It's like the door to the heavens is still open to them. But somewhere between about the ages of 4 and 10, that door ends up closing. And we end up, believing what the kids on the playground are telling us. We start believing what religion and what our parents and other things have told us. And we get indoctrinated and we just start believing the things that we're told. The problem is a lot of the things that we're told are not true, okay? They are not true. They are things that are being told to keep us asleep and to keep us in fear and anxiety and to make us submissive to beings who want to enslave us and use the negative energy for their benefit. Okay? Now, not surprising, when do most kids stop believing in Santa Claus? Sometime between the age of 4 and 10, right? And so again, I think for most kids, it's probably somewhere around 7, 8, 9, 10, that range, where the door to the heavens kind of closes, the door to the magic kind of closes as well. And so if we go back to the Polar Express book, right, that's kind of what this was talking about, is that, if you can hear the bell, right, can you hear this bell? Right, and this is a little silver bell. It's not really silver. It's some cheap material because it doesn't sound that good. That we hang on our Christmas tree, and it's got etched in it. It says "believe," right? And so again, in theory, or the idea with that Polar Express is, hey, if you can hear the bell, then you believe in the magic, right? So let me ask you: have you let the world get in the way? Did you used to believe in magic, and now you don't anymore? Right? And what would it feel like if you started believing in the magic again? Because I will tell you, magic is real. Okay? Magic is real. Now, you can choose to be like, the people in the pods in the Matrix movie. You can stay asleep. You can just sleep your way through life if you want to, or you can take the red pill and you can decide to start seeing the world as it actually is. So if you want to start seeing the world as it actually is, start believing in magic, start listening to some of the stuff that I'm doing, some of the stuff that other people are doing, and get that magic back. Okay? Because I will tell you, it's much more fun to believe in Santa and believe in magic and have a good time at the holidays instead of being a Scrooge or a Grinch. Okay? I'm just saying. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that, right? So again, you can choose. It's up to you. Do you want to hear the bells, or do you want to go through life sleeping? Now, let's talk a little bit more about bells and some of the ways that they can be used as well, right? So again, I've got this little bell that I have here, the one that was from our tree. And so again, I hang that on the tree and think about that again so that I can remember and retain the magic. Now, this other bell that I have, if you're watching the video, you can see it. I think it's made out of brass. It's a Tibetan bell. Very beautiful sound. Very beautiful sound to me, right? Well, I hang this on the back of my door, of our front door. So every time we open or close the door, right, it's kind of like you're walking in and out of a shop. Sometimes stores will put bells or things like that on their front door so that way when people walk through, they know somebody is there. Well, I don't hang this on my door for that reason. I hang it there for a different reason, right? So if we go back and we think about It's a Wonderful Life, right? If every time I hear a bell, I start to remember and start to remind myself of the magic that is all around me, every time I hear bells, I think of the magic. So it can stand as a reminder to me that every time I hear a bell, that I'm not going to believe all the bullshit that I get taught. I'm going to believe in magic. I'm going to think positively. But also it is I use bells for another reason as well. Okay, and similar to bells are things called chimes, right? So here's another one that I have that you can hear. It's a chime that when it plays, right, it plays some very beautiful music. I have a chime outside in my backyard on my patio as well. Now, why do I do that? Well, the sound when the wind comes through, it makes a calm and gentle sound, right? You just if I sat here and played this for 30 seconds, and you just listen to that, whatever negative emotions are going on in your life, you're going to start to calm down. You're going to start to feel more at ease. You're going to start to feel happier, more peaceful, because that's the vibration that those are giving off, right? So the fact that I have those dotted around different places means that I'm going to be more likely to hear some of those things, remind myself again to believe in the magic, but also to help me calm down. Now, another reason why I have it there is it's also a way for beings to speak to us as well. Okay. Again, beings can't reach out and grab you. They can, but they don't. But, I know that when I hear certain things that are going on, a lot of times they're confirmations or it is a realization that I am being supported by beings around me, right? And so again, those beings can be lots of different beings. We'll talk about that maybe later. But again, that's one of the reasons why I have them. Now, you can also use bells as a way to kind of clear energy as well, right? So again, those of you that are more spiritually minded, you've probably heard of things like smudging and using crystals and some other things to kind of clear energy. Well, you can also do that with bells as well, or with chimes. And so I actually have this chime over here that has a double resonance to it, that I will use to help kind of clear some of the energy around me and help me to start and stop certain practices like meditation, right? So a lot of times when people meditate, you can use something like that to kind of get yourself into that state of being, and you can come out of it using something like that as well. The kind of little timer that I have on my phone that I use when I'm sitting silently goes in with a chime, comes out with a chime, because that's what I chose to put on there, right? So those are again some of the different ways that you can actually literally use bells as a musical instrument as well to be able to help regulate your emotion or include into some of your spiritual practices, and we'll probably talk about that more as well. But for purposes of today, I wanted to kind of keep it to that, but I wanted to also share with you um, one of my favorite Christmas carols, and it's one that a lot of people don't know about, um, but it's called "I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day." And so when I was younger, we had this little piano book with different Christmas carols in it, and so I would sit down at the piano and I would try to, peck it out a little bit and play as I'm singing. And this was one of those songs that always kind of really resonated with me. And I'm going to go through and kind of sing it to you now, because you may or may not have heard it. It's been recorded by a few people, but it's not one of the more popular Christmas songs that you hear about, but it has a very beautiful meaning that goes along with it that I wanted to talk about too as we kind of wrap up today's episode. Now, before we can get in, we got to have a little bit of context though, because I think it's always good to have context. The more context you can have, the better you can actually understand anything that you are trying to learn. Okay. And so I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day was actually written, it was a poem written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So again, you might not know who Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was, but you might have heard of some of the other stuff. Like his most famous poem is called Paul Revere's Ride. And I think it's, come children and listen, and you will hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, right? And he also did one called The Song of Hiawatha. But anyway, he lived back in the 1800s. Some other people that were his friends and contemporaries that you might have heard of are people like Edgar Allan Poe, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Walt Whitman, Ralph Waldo Emerson, those kinds of people. So Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was around that same time. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit just about this poem as well, and some things that were going on in Henry's life at the time, because again, it's always interesting how some of these things end up coming up. So if you remember, in the 1860s, it was a dark time in the United States. Okay. We were fighting the Civil War. And so it was a very bloody, people were dying, brothers were fighting brothers. And it was a really, really dark time in the United States between the war and a lot of the things that were going on around slavery and some of the other things that were just happening. And so for a lot of people, it was a very dark time. Now, for Henry, in 1861, his second wife was fatally burned, right? So there was an accidental fire. She ended up burning and dying, right, in 1861. So that's not a good thing, right? Some serious shit was going down in Henry's life at that time. His wife died. Now, in 1863, his son Charles ended up signing up and going into the Civil War as a Union Army soldier. And again, it's one of those where you hate to kind of see your son go off to battle, but his son goes off to battle and was actually very seriously injured in the Battle of Mine Run in 1863. So Henry had a couple of bad years, right? And so interesting, on Christmas Day, 1863, Henry wrote the poem, I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. Okay. Now, it wasn't published until February of 1865. So it was a couple years later before people actually got to hear it. But he wrote this poem on Christmas Day, 1863. Now, it wasn't set to music until 1872. So over 20 years later, it was just a poem before, but somebody arranged it and set it to music, and people started singing it as a Christmas carol. And then in 1956, Bing Crosby actually recorded it. He didn't do all of the verses, but he did some. And so again, we have the recordings of that. And if you remember from last week, we talked a little bit about Bing Crosby as well. But I wanted to go through and just sing this song to you, because I think, in hearing the context of it, you can imagine that there were some dark things going on in Henry's life at the time, but it's still a poem of hope as well, right? And so again, there's some things going on in our world right now that maybe are not the best, right? But we can choose to see things for the hope that it can be, and help us to be able to get through. And that's kind of how I see this song as well. So I'm going to go a cappella. And again, this is just kind of based on my memory of singing this when I was younger, but listen to the words as well as we go through this, okay? I heard the bells on Christmas Day their old familiar carols play, and mild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to man. And thought how as the day had come the belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to man. Till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day. A voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to man. Then from each black accursed mouth the cannons thundered in the south, and with the sound the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to man. It was as if an earthquake rent the hearthstones of a continent, and made forlorn the households born of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to man. So I just love that song. And, a couple of those verses are actually taken out most of the time when people are singing the song because it makes reference to the Civil War, right? About the earthquake and the cannons thundering in the South, but again, that was the time when Henry wrote this song. And, that the whole thing, this verse too, and in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song. And, I know that sometimes we all feel that way. We feel some despair, but I love how he finished it. Then peal the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail. And my friends, I'm here to tell you, the wrong will always fail and the right will prevail. And there's some stuff going on in the world, but you know what? When we stay positive and when we are the change, when we bring out the bells, when we remind other people of the magic that is truly going on in this world, when we are the magic, when we believe in the magic, great things happen. And so never give up hope. Always have hope. Always have hope. Always have hope. And that's my wish for you at this holiday time as well. as we've gone through and talked about bells, and a reminder that we can have peace on earth as we share goodwill to men and women all over. And as we all remember that we are brothers and sisters going through the same things. So have a little bit more compassion for the people around you. Share a little bit more love. Bring that peace to the earth that we need. Be the peace, be the change that we need to have in this life. So, with that, I'm going to wrap up for today, wishing you a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, depending on when you're listening to this. And my prayer to you is that you may have peace and love and joy throughout this week and throughout the rest of your week until we can be together again. And I will see you later, my friend.